Hi, good afternoon. I am reporting here from the ballroom where the executive session of the clergy of the Baltimore-Washington conference just concluded business early, and so that's always welcome. And so I wanted to give you a summary of what happened. As I mentioned before, the executive session of the clergy is a closed session, so we couldn't send any updates to anybody outside the room. So even my husband was sending me pictures of chocolate, and all he got was, "Yay, that looks good." But now I can give you a bit of a summary of what happened. So as I mentioned before, the executive session of the clergy is the time when clergy status is discussed and approved, and really is the culmination of the work of the Board of Ordained Ministry. Now, one of the ongoing discussions we've had in the Baltimore-Washington conference tied to our denominational discussions around ordination and clergy rights for LGBTQ persons has been ongoing for a couple of years, as we have had a couple of candidates who are out and who are married to persons of the same gender. In the past couple of years, those persons have been handled in a variety of ways. Last year, our bishop, receiving a request from the floor, pulled the two persons, one for our provisional class and one for our full member class, off of the list so that the executive session didn't vote on them. And the Judicial Council ruled that that was a violation of the separation of power. This year, those persons remained on the list. The Board of Ordained Ministry affirmed both their and the entire class's full examination. I serve on the Board of Ordained Ministry and as chair of the examination committee, and so this is something that our board has worked on for many years and certainly continued to discuss this past year. Now, a couple of the things that were at play as the session got underway, one was we started off by having a motion that was made to have voting done by hand votes or by standing votes, as opposed to the electronic voting devices that we've been using for a number of years. And the sentiment behind that, I think, seemed to be folks who wanted people to have to vote openly, stand for what you believe. And so there was discussion around that. In the end, that motion did not pass, and so we were continuing forward with electronic voting, although our bishop, who by rules can decide how to do voting in general, did take the kind of easy majority votes by hand ballot. But part of the challenge with using a hand ballot is that, especially in this session, there are different percentages that are needed for votes. It's not just simple majority in most of the votes. Any changes to clergy status have to be approved by 3/4 of the body, and that is an incredibly high bar. It's an incredibly high bar. So the electronic voting did help a great deal with those percentages, because not only did we get vote totals, but immediately on the screen as the results were displayed, the percentages were shown, and so it allowed the bishop, our presiding officer, to immediately be able to know how those votes went. So the motion to not use the electronic balloting did not pass. Then the next motion that was brought was a motion to vote on the classes for commissioning and ordination together as a whole. I didn't count. Let's say a dozen folks who are approved for commission, who the board is recommending, the Board of Ordained Ministry, for commissioning, and then the board is recommending after examination for ordination. And this has been an issue that's come up before, because there's one of the phrases that is used is blowing up the report. So the question being, are persons willing to vote against all of the candidates in order to block one candidate? Or vice versa? Are supporters of folks who want to make sure we get LGBTQ person, are they willing to block all the other candidates from getting ordained because that person can't get through? Because 3/4 is a high bar. So really, the question is whether the question of holding the candidates together was a very important question. Also, what that could eventually lead to if candidates were voted on individually, and there was a little bit of discussion about whether candidates would be asked questions on the floor of the executive session. Now, there are precedents in our conference for both of these approaches, and there was a little discussion about what the history is. Do we vote on candidates one by one, and in so doing, do we ask them questions, or do we rely on the thorough work of the Board of Ordained Ministry? And so there was a lot of emphasis on the work that the board has already done, and the percentage that was needed to approve the motion to hold the classes together. So vote on all those being commissioned and all those being ordained together was a simple majority vote, and that passed. So that meant that candidates weren't going to be voted on separately, which meant that persons who opposed the commissioning or ordination of those couple of candidates had to decide whether they would be willing to vote against all of the candidates. And in the past, that had been a gauntlet that even some progressives were hesitant to put out there. Because what would we do? Like, what would we do if the entire class were voted against? I suspect there would be some solutions if the class were voted against. Probably somebody would vote to divide the question again, vote for reconsideration. But in the end, the body approved voting for all of the commissioning class as one and all of the ordination class as one. So then, and we're continuing to work through the report. So these two classes are not the only thing that we're voting on. I mentioned in a previous video that the report can be as long as 50 pages. It was actually just shy of 40 pages this year. But we're moving through the questions. When we came to the portion of our commissioning class, we voted on the entire commissioning class together, persons to be commissioned, including T.C. Morrow, who has been a candidate who has been with our conference for a very long time, considering ordination, and has really been through the highs and lows of the past couple of years. Was one of the candidates whose name was pulled off the list last year, and has shown incredible grace throughout all of this. And so the challenge was that the class had been kept together to be voted on, but a three-quarter bar is a really high bar to get to, so we voted, waited to see what the results were, and the class passed. The entire class as a whole, including TC, passed with more than three-quarters of the vote. And there was a lot of folks were very excited. Some were not, but a lot of folks were very, very excited. The sense in the room, I think, for many people was that this was a very important moment in the life of our annual conference. Then when we came to the ordination class, again, that class being kept together as a whole, and one of our candidates, Joey Heath Mason, whose name was pulled off of the report last year by the bishop, was included in that class. That class was again voted upon by the session, and again, over three-quarters of the clergy voting agreed to pass the entire class. So everybody who was recommended by our Board of Ordained Ministry, after thorough investigation and examination, the entire class was passed, affirms all of our candidates. Certainly the discussions that we have focus around a couple of candidates who've been part of our discernment as a conference, but there are so many wonderful candidates, and for them, their commissioning and their ordination are the culmination of their work. And so we want to celebrate all of those, each person who has been approved for commissioning and for ordination. And we'll see throughout the rest of the annual conference, we'll see through there are mechanisms within our denominational rules for folks to challenge the status of clergy through charges, and we'll see if any folks who have issues with these or other folks might do that. But as a body, the clergy session affirmed all of our candidates, and so a very exciting day for many persons, and especially after the special session of General Conference, which really continued, and in some cases, those portions of the traditional plan that were passed strengthens the exclusionary policies of the denomination. The work here with the Baltimore-Washington Conference certainly, I think, rises in in resistance to that, and in opposition to some of what we see in other areas of the general church. As we shared through General Conference, the United Methodist Church is a very diverse conference, and our conference in particular is a very diverse conference, being geographically where we are, with a range of socioeconomic, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation diversities. And so we continue to minister in that tension. And so we will see whether there is any continued discussion throughout the rest of the annual conference of the actions of the executive session, and even flowing from that. That work in the executive session continued with the recognition of those who are retiring. There are a number of pieces of work that were done, but certainly the most noteworthy, and maybe what you all were waiting to hear, was about our commissioning ordination class. And so I'm excited as a member of the Board of Ordained Ministry to have been affirmed as a board in our work by the executive session. And so we took an early break, so we're on dinner break now, and the conference will gather for opening worship tonight at 7 p.m. That will be live streamed, so I encourage you to check that out. It's scheduled to be 7 to 9. And then tomorrow morning, we'll start with Bible study. I don't have it in front of me. I think 8:30, and then we'll start with plenary session in the morning. And then I think that we're not scheduled to get to legislation or the election of delegates until the afternoon. But all of that will be on the live stream, and I'll continue to give you updates tomorrow. There's not going to be any closed sessions tomorrow, and so throughout the next few days, I'll be sure to update you throughout the day with on breaks, and let you know how the business of the annual conference continues to unfold. Thank you very much.